Okay, awesome. So we all are finally here. Thanks, guys, for joining. Maybe we can start. It's 10:02. The audience will keep on joining, so we can start this webinar. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll just quickly share the agenda and go over the introductions. Let me share my screen. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen.
Gotta make sure not to share the secret information that is always on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We have good participants. Okay, great. So guys, today's topic for the discussion is API security in DevSecOps, a topic obviously that we've been working on for past 3 years, and we have the panelists over here who will learn from on this topic. Quick agenda on the topic. We'll have a bit of introductions from everyone. We'll talk about the top API security challenges. We'll learn from the panelists how to build a successful API security program and their learnings over the past years. Some difference between shift left versus product right, what people prefer here, what have been the learnings for both the approaches, and the learnings around API security in DevSecOps. How do companies do this? What is the best practice around it? And the last section is Q&A. It's going to be about a 45 minutes webinar. So let's start. Introductions. Ankur Jain is lead product security at Atlassian. Has great experience in security architecture, supply chain security, API security. 14 years of application security experience. Ankur Jain, we would love to hear from you. Can you give maybe a brief intro about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So as Ankita has pointed out, currently working at Atlassian, had worked also in Palo Alto, being very much towards the application security side of the scenarios, specifically in product security, identifying security design mechanisms that could be used for a particular team, and then characterizing them as a general security pattern across multiple different architectures. Being interested in that on and off. Apart from that, yeah, that's me in short right now.
Very nice to have you here, Ankur. We know we've been trying to get you for last maybe 1 year or so to some kind of webinar. So I'm finally glad that you're here. Thank you for joining.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And the next, Sean Finley. Again, I think we've spoken about it for last 2 months, but finally, great to have you here, Sean, Director in Application Security at Eptura. He also has extensive experience in AppSec, and I would love it, Sean, if you can give a brief intro about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. So I'm Sean Finley, currently the Director of Application and Product Security at Eptura. I've been in AppSec for about 11 years, software for close to 30 years. It's something I really enjoy. I love building programs and working cross-functionally with different areas who are responsible for getting good software to production.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Sean, for being here. And finally, Anatoly. He's the VP Security Engineering at HealthEquity. More than 15-16 years of experience in AppSec and all things DevSecOps. Anatoly, would love to get some introduction from yourself.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ankita. So nice to meet everybody. My name is Anatoly Chikanov. So I'm actually leading 3 different teams: the security engineering, security architecture, and DevSecOps teams within my organization. So I come a little bit more of a traditional corporate security background, but has been extensively working with the product organizations over the years, as far as shipping secure software and better understanding kind of the reality of how everything fits within the business, specifically as the adoption of the APIs is skyrocketing, and then in terms of kind of overall making sure we provide the secure product over to our customers. So that's one of our focus areas as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Anatoly, for joining. And a little bit about myself. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Akto. We've been building Akto for last 3 years. It's an early stage startup in API security space. This is obviously a topic that we talk about a lot every day, every week, and we have a lot of good learnings to share. And I think one of the things that I really like is bringing people who have extensive experience in AppSec and API security and talk about their learnings for our audience. So very excited for this webinar. Let's start. Just some hygiene. Tips to join in, guys. Chat is there. You can also ask here. There's a Q&A, there's chat. You can ask any question. We'll be more than happy to answer. There's also going to be some resource sharing over here. So feel free to look at some resources around API security. Okay, let's jump into the session. I'm going to stop sharing just so that we have everyone here. All right. Okay, so the very first bit is around, just to set the context also around API security. We talk to obviously potential users, our current users, customers, everyone on their daily challenges around API security, and depending on how large your organization is, how mature your AppSec program is, the challenges kind of vary. So and I think, Sean, we have had this discussion very much at depth around what the challenges are in different organizations. I would love to know from all of you, maybe Sean, starting from you, what are the top 2 to 3 challenges that you think are very important from API security perspective, and how people should think about it when they're building the API security program?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, in my experience, some of the biggest sort of challenges that I've faced are one, lack of visibility. Really understanding what APIs are in my environment. I think that's something that I've seen a lot of at multiple organizations, that there's a lot of sprawl. Sometimes engineering's not even sure of all their APIs. So I think that's a critical piece. I think as well as governance. A lot of times I've had conversations with engineering and architectural partners around what their standards are, what the organization standards are around building APIs, and ensuring that those standards are adhered to. And I think that's a challenge for both engineering as well as security.
Got it. So for you, API visibility and governance are the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to steal from an opportunity for Anatoly or Ankur to participate. There's other ones, but those are ones that are top of mind for me. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Definitely number ones from what I have heard from other customers as well, but from customers as well. But yeah, so Ankur, Anatoly, maybe Ankur, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I would kind of put it in the same phase as Sean has kind of put it, but also what I've seen time by time is there's lack of asset management as for, like, we cannot understand which assets are open and what part are they open to. So actually services that are actually communicating outwards from the corporation, and then internal assets that are talking to one another. So that through APIs, that becomes a problem, and we can't make those distinctions because we don't know what is talking to what, and it becomes increasingly difficult with microservices being involved in the architecture. And you might have an API gateway to kind of cater to that kind of a scenario, but there are situations where most likely API gateways might not touch that idea. The other part, as the organization grows, they're in transition mode. So there's multiple ways that APIs are defined. You could have REST APIs, you can have GraphQL APIs. So the problem is as such that maybe you have vulnerabilities that are existing for, across all different types of APIs, but solving for each one kind of becomes very difficult. In how do we get around creating solutions that might holistically solve that problem? that's what I would put as two common places that I've seen a lot of issues occurring as time progresses. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Ankur, this might be so you've talked about catering to different types of APIs, GraphQL, REST, gRPC, and you've talked about internal assets, how the APIs are talking to internal assets and mainly internal APIs, right? I think these are also very important, especially if when the organizations become really large, right? Because for smaller organization, maybe types of APIs are not as big problem, but as the organizations have more than 2,000, 5,000 API endpoints, this definitely becomes a very large problem. And
yeah, it's on the scaling side as well. And then let's not forget that as companies grow, they also have mergers and acquisitions that happen, and their mechanisms of doing authorization, authentication kind of differ from the general way, and also henceforth their APIs are quite different. So there's a mix and match of areas that tend to happen.
Correct. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we hear a lot are, especially in the discovery calls, that as an AppSec leader, I know I have REST APIs, but I don't know what all other type of APIs that I have, and which is very true. Like developers are coding, writing APIs every day, and you don't know what all formats they are using. So becomes a big problem.
That's a great point. Just to add on to what Ankur's saying, and my kind of point about the lack of visibility is, I've been in shops where it's like, oh yeah, we have REST APIs, that's what we do, and then all of a sudden I'm finding, hey, look, there's some SOAP services lying around. Like, where'd those come from, and who's maintaining those things? And that's a whole different ball game.
I would probably chime in and say that my view is a little bit differently. I think most organizations actually don't have a clear API strategy. And that's one of the major roadblocks, right? What are we doing with APIs? How we're monetizing them? And end-to-end ownership of APIs is not clearly defined from an accountability and responsibility perspective oftentimes too, right? So there's the handoff from the engineering over to the platform engineering to the SREs over and everything in between. And where does the security plug in this whole matrix, right? So my recommendation would be for a lot of organizations to kind of take APIs view from the business perspective. Okay, well, these are the business critical APIs that we need to maintain to run the shop. Establish end-to-end accountability for each of those APIs, define them, have visibility, have governance on those, right? But then have an overarching strategy towards, okay, how we're going to utilize the APIs in our enterprise, right? Are they supporting the backend process specifically, or are they more client-facing APIs that we're making money from, or they're somewhere in the between, right? So I think that the lack of strategy and the lack of responsibility and accountability from end to end is one of the more critical issues that, in my opinion, that I experienced.
Got it. Nice.
If I may add on that one, Anatoly, you're completely right on that side of things. But as I was trying to point out, that organizations tend to change and they grow, and then some products either mash up or kind of disintegrate into multiple other applications. What I think you're trying to say is like tagging those APIs into what part of the critical infrastructure do they sit in. But as time progresses, it's been a hard problem, to be honest with you, even with the assets being tagged. That who talks to them, where do they get opened, and how do they?
Not specifically, Ankur. I was thinking it more from the perspective, okay, you tie the certain assets over to certain platforms, right? As the business changes, for example, we're decommissioning this platform. If you have a full asset inventory of what were the APIs associated with that platform, then they should be shut down, right? Think about it from that perspective, right? If we're going to be investing more in this platform, then we need to modernize those APIs and make sure they keep on running, right? So you tie them more to the business context, not to the technical context. Specifically from that perspective, right?
Got it. Got it. Yeah, very Anatoly, very interesting way to look at it, right? So what you're saying is basically think more from the business context of the APIs, not from technical context. So if there are business specific APIs, like prioritize those for security, correct?
Both of those, right? I mean, because you're going to have a lot of APIs that are backend, right? Like between different microservices, but they're ultimately all part of some platform, or they're providing some sort of derived value. Because the APIs are really like a service for a lot of internal customers and external customers, right? So this way, the governance and asset inventory and the visibility, these are key components, but they must fit into the overarching strategy. Well, how are you utilizing the APIs to support the business, right? Because ultimately, that's the business is in the business of generating money, right?
Correct.
So and the way that they use API, we need to make sure that they use in secure fashion, and then you can obtain appropriate resources for optimizations, right? For example, if you know this API platform that's and that is heavily utilized is going to be part of the product roadmap for next 5 years, okay, then you prioritize your security investment towards that platform, because that is not a platform that's going to be necessarily sunset right away, but it's going to grow, expect to add new functionality, and you can architect it in an appropriate way, right? And you know this, whether it's using various flavors of API, it's all really the same, right? At the end of the day, you have to provide that as a service. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Interesting. And Anatoly, since you're talking about the strategy around it, how would you, probably a question for our audience also, what recommendations will you give to them to build, if they are thinking about building their API security program and they are in the early phases, what recommendation will you give? How should they start?
I would probably align really closely with your, if you have an architecture organization within your organization, right? Align closely with them, because they're typically the ones that set the standards and like, okay, this is what we're going to be utilizing. And then work really closely with both the product and the engineering organization. From the product perspective, to understand, okay, what is the vision for next 3 years, right? What are we expecting to deliver to the end customers? And you work backwards from that, figure, okay, we need to deliver to customers XYZ functionality. And then in order to provide this XYZ functionality, we're going to have a set of APIs. And each API is going to be doing this, going to be doing that, doing that. Okay. And then you work backwards even more. So, okay, well, then we work closely with the engineering organization as part of the engineering spec. This is what we recommend. We have a consistent approach. This is the checklist of security controls that needs to go into each API design stage. So whenever the APIs are ready for consumption, they'll be designed and built properly from the inception, right? Because it is nigh to impossible to retrofit APIs once you release them and they become very popular, right? Because then you're looking at downtime with the customers. Customer success is all not very happy about that. Management is not happy about that, right? So and this is the topic you're going to cover in more detail down the line, so it's shift left versus defend right. But this is where, as part of the API strategy, you want to define some of those elements up front. But in order to understand what is going to be happening in the next 3 years, you need to understand what is the business direction, what is going to be the product direction, what's coming in. And a close alignment with the product and engineering becomes really critical for the API security program to be successful, in my opinion. This is because without those things, then you come in later on after everything has been designed. Then you try to retrofit your controls around the existing stack and how it operates. And it might not be the best design from architectural perspective. It makes it more difficult to secure. You might not be able to capture everything. Then you need to rework things. So it's one of those cases.
Got it.
So if you're starting brand new, I would recommend to work closely with the product and engineering organization as a first steps, understand, set the roadmap, work backwards from it.
Got it. Okay. Your recommendation is basically design first and, tackling security
Yes.
at the design phase itself. Wow, amazing. So that answers our shift left versus product right also, but we'll get deeper into that question.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, Sean, why don't you tell us, if somebody over here is to build an API security program and they are in the initial phases, what would you recommend? How should they start about it?
Yeah, and I think if I'm hearing Anatoly right, I would be in 100% agreement. I think, having the perspective that security is a service of the business, we really need to be partnering with the business side of things to understand what is the business strategy around applications, APIs, whatever it is, and we're here to provide a service to help them understand the risks presented. So definitely, I think, partnering with the business is important. Making sure you're understanding the product strategy around the API program, whether they're going to be supportive backend services or, customer-facing external endpoints, I think is critical. And again, working with technical leadership to put together a design and governance program to say, hey, these are what the standards are for how we intend to build and deploy our APIs, and making sure that your program aligns with those objectives. I think that to the point of the asset sort of management perspective and who's responsible for what, I think that's key. When you're here to advise the business on risks presented, you need to know who to talk to. You need to know who owns what. And when you have an observation of something that's bespoke or out of line with your standards, you need to know who to go to that's responsible for it, to educate them on what's going on and to hold them accountable for adhering to standards. So I think those were all very good starting points.
Nice. Awesome. So I think you're in alignment that it should be more at the design phase and doing API governance first before we go into, the post-deployment phase. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical to where things start, especially for things that are net new. I think we all live in the real world and know that there are already APIs that are deployed and services that are out in the wild, and we're going to have to help, wrangle those cats. So there's definitely a runtime aspect to it, but you definitely want to sort of stop the bleed and get things going in the right direction for things that are net new projects, and work with the engineering leadership on how to correct the things that are already out there.
awesome. What's your take, Ankur, on this?
I'm sort of in the same boat as Sean and Anatoly. Governance is a big area that things could be solved for. It would be, I think first we need to explore within the organization what is an API definition essentially, right? Because there's multiple ways APIs could be defined. You could have, your SOAP-based, I don't know why, but you would have SOAP-based APIs, and you can have REST-based APIs. Based off of that, if you can come up with a generalized standardizations that these are the general API mechanisms that will be used across, it'll be easier. The other part is to empower the team members to actually utilize secure defaults. Like if you were to bring up a instance that has APIs exposed, it should be going through an API gateway rather than just letting it expose on the internet, which is going to be a problem. Which kind of creates a better way for us to understand what are the net new APIs that are coming on board and how do they react. It also allows us to understand what asset belongs to which team, so you can actually understand within the enterprise what are the assets and how do they communicate externally and within each other. I think that would be the starting point. You obviously need engineering on your side to actually help you drive this further, because whatever we do as an event of this kind of discovery, it will be a one-time event. You want this to run succinctly as time progresses, and then you would want them to you would actually want them to kind of help build a platform that allows registration of APIs and assets to APIs. That allows you to kind of understand what it's a one-stop shop, and then essentially you have sort of a record of what APIs are exposed where. You could then from there on kind of identify or create rule sets that if something gets exposed outwards, it's an anomaly, which helps us on the investigation side as well and solves the problem that we might come across. And also with this understanding exploration, you can also define security patterns that will allow you to even bolt security defaults into the organization, into the development area.
Got it. Wow. So Ankur, you've mentioned both. I think on the shift left side of having the governance, having the API spec file, and having really the documentation, and doing security at the design phase, and also doing anomaly detection at the protect side, right, on the runtime side. So I guess your strategy is more like doing the whole API lifecycle, covering the whole API lifecycle from design to protect.
Yes. I know the industry has been running always in shift left, and what we fail to understand is what's happening in the shift right, because as Sean has pointed out, that we do have some things that have been exposed as some APIs that are out there in the wild that we haven't had any chance to kind of get an understanding of. So how do you protect that area? You want to make sure the enterprise is protected from any attacks coming on those exposed APIs. So shift right at least allows you to limit the damage and the attack surface, and the blast radius you would be able to make a quick turnaround from incident response for the blast radius to not be that heavy. So shift right solves for that part of the problem. Shift left, obviously, anything coming net new that's coming, you need better mechanisms of design, strategies to have security defaults bolstered into the development pipeline, as well as scanning mechanisms that allow you to understand are there any known issues with this particular application and an exposure of APIs.
Nice.
Which I think most of the enterprises end up living somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily shift left or shift right.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of both approaches. It's so you have the more architectural execution on the shift left, where you do threat modeling, design, and the spec design, all of those things, and then you do runtime protection, right? So the key there, though, becomes is what mentioned before in terms of the governance aspect, right? Who is going to govern which various stages of the production and the operation and the design and rollout, right? It's typically various teams. It's not an end-to-end ownership. And clear understanding of that becomes the challenge in itself, right? And that's something that most organizations struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, now that we're talking about shift left versus protect right already, and there are some places, Sean and Anatoly has mentioned shift left is probably their first strategy to start with in the API security program. And for Ankur, it's kind of a balance of both shift left and protect right. So maybe Anatoly would maybe go deeper into, shift left versus protect right. When do you think shift left makes sense? When do you think protect right makes sense for an organization?
So shift left for me makes a lot more sense if you were talking from the perspective of adopting new product, for example. You want to build a new platform, right? You want to design a new platform correctly, then shift left makes perfect sense to start off from, right? And then, okay, so we set up, okay, this is going to be our end state product, what our vision is. This is how we're going to build it. It's going to use both internal microservices, API calls, and it's going to use external APIs to serve various customers, right? Then you have your checklist that you build in. Okay, well, what are the security components? You do the threat model for all the APIs. Okay, what are they going to be exposed for? You design the API spec correctly to make sure, all the authorizations and authentications are set up correctly. Then you also work and make sure you have the appropriate external controls mapped out as well, right? As part of this, okay, this is the new API is coming, and it's going to have both the internal controls and then external controls. And then you make sure, as it progresses, as all the stages is being captured, and appropriate asset management, appropriate ownership is developed, appropriate testing strategies are developed. So this way, it's a complete. You treat the API basically as a product, right? So you fully release it as a product. This is not something the developer, okay, well, go ahead, I'll write it. I'll shortcut a whole bunch of stuff. We're just going to do some easy unit testing on it. We're going to push it over to production, which is what happens oftentimes with the API stuff. And then because it's not really the web page that most people see, for example, right? And then if you adopt this comprehensive outlook on the shift left, then your security on the shift right becomes easier because it is a compliant API that is out there. It is well understood. It's well documented, and you have ownership of it assigned. You have mapped it as an asset, and then it's easier to secure. So you're running less blind spots if you invest more a little bit on the shift left. But you do need to have the right tools on the shift right approach as well, because not all the tools like your typical security firewall is not going to be supporting a lot of this, right? It's not going to be able to identify what are the API specific attacks that are exploiting the business logic behind the API, right? Is my API disclosing too much information of what it should not be disclosing, right? Was it and this fact that happens quite often is that because it was not designed properly in the first place, right? So these are the things that need to be, and the security team needs to have a clear, defined review process for API security, right? As part of development and architectural process to review it and make sure that it addresses and meets all the specs. And oftentimes that is a step that is kind of shortcutted out of existence, right? So typically security folks come in, okay, API has been built, has been designed, has been rolled out in production. What are the security controls associated with it? Well, we can add some security controls on top of it, but they're not going to be able to catch all the API attack vectors because they're not fully designed for that state, I would say, for a lot of the controls, right? So I think that these are some of the things that we need to understand as part of the holistic process.
Wow, awesome. So I think your approach is also, of course, start with the design first and shift left phase, but also have like a holistic approach of API security, which is pretty interesting. So Sean, maybe your opinion on shift left versus product right, what would you choose? What is good, bad, any of those?
Yeah, I think for this question, it's both a simple answer and a complex one. I think the simple answer for me is you do both. Like if you can, you're doing both. You're going to be looking at shift left as well as protect right. You want to cover the entire SDLC. I think the more complex part is understanding your organization. If let's say you're a startup and everything is net new, then shift left is really where your focus is going to be because that's where you're at.
Yeah.
But if you're coming into a more mature organization with a lot of already things already deployed and maybe not as much on the development side of net new services, then you're probably going to be looking at, okay, I need to understand my current space, the risks, and look at the protections necessary for the right side of the SDLC with the products that are already deployed. So I think it's really key on us as leaders to understand the organization, what the product is doing from a strategic perspective, what's out there, and really kind of guiding our strategy for securing the organization based upon what that environment tells us is there.
Got it. Nice. So basically, if it depends on which stage your organization is for the strategy, right? Maybe for a smaller organization, shift left is better. Maybe for a larger organization, it's like a combined holistic approach, which is
Yeah,
what
and I think for wherever you have development occurring, shift left needs to be a part of what you're doing. But yeah, I don't think that you do one or the other. I think you do both, and it's the balance sort of what your organization is as to where the majority of your focus might be. But you definitely don't want to ignore either side of that equation.
Got it. Nice.
Almost want to chime in and to comment to what Sean and you were saying, Ankita, is that the balance between the organization and the maturity stage and what their APIs are. It almost feels like if you're a smaller organization, it's a little bit easier for you to lean left more because you're designing a secure product from the beginning, and it's actually going to be more cost effective for you to ship it in a more secure stage. So this way, okay, you're also able to utilize that as a more of a advantageous for your overall products because they're better designed. You're going to be able to better pass all the security assessments associated with API. What are the questions, right? If you're partnering with a lot of partners and you're providing API services to the partners, then if you shift to kind of left on your terms of your resources, then you're able to design a proper one. And then once you kind of roll out the product and you have some adoption, then you kind of swing the pendulum a little bit more towards the middle to make sure that everything is covered from the runtime because you do have them operationalized at that point, right? So that's the intrinsic kind of balance. The organizations that are more mature, they're larger, that kind of adopted APIs kind of ad hoc, they would probably be more leaning on the shift right approach most of the time because they have a boatload of stuff already running, right? They need to make sure that it's being secured, right? So they're not necessarily always going to be kind of in the middle. But I think that the balance is the key element to what Sean has mentioned.
Yeah, no, 100%. Maybe Ankur, something.
Yeah, I think one thing on my mind also is the risk appetite that the organization has as time progresses. Because yes, shift left is our way that we have been able to secure a good percentage of things. But what tends to happen is even with secure design in place and us doing threat modeling and all the fun stuff, we identify security bugs, which are also possibly by some scanning mechanism could be identified and validated, but it's still in the shift left zone. It's very hard to characterize that this will become an issue, or is it an issue? Kind of, that's where if the company thinks they can accept the risk appetite, you still need something on the shift right side in case that issue actually becomes a threat and a vulnerability. You need to be ready to identify what's the damage and how quickly can you resolve the issue without bleeding out. That's where I think, yes, depending on the company's I guess maturity as well as their risk appetite, things tend to take changes. And yeah, also with the maturity also comes new integrations, new various ways to work. Multi-cloud is a reality at this point of stage. Everyone is using different cloud environments which interact different ways through their APIs. So the attack surface just keeps on adding on, and the organization doesn't understand what's the risk of exposing an API. You could explain them, and it's up to them to identify, do they have the risk appetite for letting this go? In the eventual case, which happens once in a while, where the organization accepts those risks, we still need something on the back to help in case a situation actually becomes a situation. So yeah. And I think the last thing I would like to say, also solutioning for both shift right, shift left also depends on the scalability. There's been multiple instances where we've actually thought of shift right, but the solution just doesn't scale. Yeah. And it's conflicting with engineering to begin with. That if they're deploying something and this thing, we add an agent on top of it, and it takes forever for this thing to come up, they're not going to apply that solution.
Yeah, no, 100% Ankur. And in fact, like even in shift left, there are scale challenges, but especially for the product right, the runtime API security, there, if you have multi-cloud, multiple microservices, multiple types of APIs, and like all the scale challenges, it becomes extremely, extremely hard to do that with the current solutions out there in the market. But I guess what I'm hearing is there is sort of a balanced approach that organizations can take, and it really depends on the size of the organization as well. I'll talk about my experience working with the smallest of the startups and also the Fortune 500s and large companies. For the large companies, people who are building the API security program, they've been building for 1 year, 2 years, and so on. They are really focused on pretty much every area. They start with the easiest thing, which is easiest meaning the most important thing, which is API discovery. But they kind of want to touch the shift left, the product right, the middle part of it, which Anatoly mentioned, something like API scanning. So they want to do the whole thing. They don't want to leave even one bit. And this is for the large organization, because the APIs are getting deployed every day, so they want to look at the design strategy as well. The APIs are already in production, so they want to look at the API protection part as well. But for the smaller companies, I don't think they care so much about the API protection, because that's very expensive for them to deploy and to start with. And like they care, for them it's much easier to start with working with developers, have a API design strategy, API scanning, and starting with that side, the shift left side, versus protect right, which is very heavy for them to adopt in the early stages. So that's what we have seen in our experience. And all of you have talked about working with product teams, working with developers for your API security strategy, and I think this is where we see companies struggle a lot, because having it's easier said than done that shift left your API security program, but how? It's hard to get developers to do the governance on APIs, write an API in a secure way, and it's not because they don't want to, but because it's just very hard to get checklist and make sure everyone is following it, kind of thing. So maybe Sean, from your experience, how would you suggest somebody in AppSec team work with developers on their API security program? What is that process they should follow? How do they start from step 1 to step 10, kind of?
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of starts with empathy, understanding where they're coming from. And I think that's probably where I lean a lot on the first part of my technical career being on the software side instead of on the security side, is I have a lot of empathy for what product teams and development teams are going through to try to get product to production. And so that's usually where I start my conversations with engineering leadership, is level setting on, I know where they're coming from, and I know that I'm just another thing that they have to deal with to get their product to production. And I think that helps build relationships, because sometimes you can use the stick, but you shouldn't be using the stick when you can use a carrot. And so, making sure that you're in communication, in collaboration, that you're communicating that you're an asset and a service for them, and that you're not just there to be another requirement for them to have to fulfill, I think is starting point number one. And being appreciative of the cognitive load that they face. I mean, they're getting product requirements, tech debt issues, and everything that sits in their backlog that's got to get forced into every sprint. I think that you need to appreciate that. I think there also needs to be a discussion with leadership on both engineering and the product side about, where does security fit in what their plans are? Is there going to be a dedicated, amount of story points every sprint, or a percentage of the work on a quarterly basis that, you're going to be able to be there and be a part of the planning sessions and, understand their workload, talk about the things that are important to the business from a risk perspective, and incorporating those things into the plans as they're making them. And that goes into sort of the engagement piece of what I do, is making sure that security is a part of what they're doing, making sure they understand how it relates to what they're doing, and hopefully, when you're doing things that are sort of required, that you're finding a way to make it either interesting or fun. Gamification is a big part of security education. I like to give training to our engineers that is engaging, that is relevant to what they do every day. I don't give them bland videos that are irrelevant. They're getting labs in the languages and IDEs that they work in, so it's familiar when they're doing their jobs. And then, putting together gamification, making it, competitive, and, getting people who are interested and curious, opportunity to be security champions. And then, from the more process and tool side of things is be embedded, integrate tools in the tool chain that they live in. Don't throw them out of what they do. Make sure that you're engaging them where they live, because they don't have the time to go learn your stuff. You need to learn their stuff and put security in their lives, feedback and PRs and whatever their ticketing system is, and just being where they live, listening to how they work. I've got a security platform that has an IDE plugin that nobody uses. I'm not going to go drive an initiative to throw IDE plugins as the thing to do for my shift left strategy, because nobody wants to do it. It's just another thing for them to have to deal with when they want to just write code. And so I think understanding, how they live every day is very important as well.
No, yeah, no, I think you've mentioned lots of amazing strategies. So if anyone is listening, these are really good strategies for any shift left API AppSec program, actually, not just specific to API security. So pretty cool. Maybe Anatoly, if anything you want to add over here.
Yeah, I think Sean stole most of the ideas that I have. So I think I think one of the key focuses for me, and what Sean really has been talking about, is just basically try to kind of make sure you're engaged in the process, right? I think that becomes in both communication, working with product to embed the security elements and make sure there's appropriate time, but then also working within the time frames and the confines of the development process, right? The tooling that they utilize, the processes. You have to understand there's only a finite amount of time, and then whatever you come in needs to be more or less seamless, right? That is the experience. So think it from the perspective of developer experience. If your solution to kind of analyze the API is going to take them 2 weeks, how does that affect the product roadmap? How does that affect their ability to ship the product, right? Maybe you need to make sure that your review process for the new API specification is going to be 1 day or less. So this way it can be budgeted, timed, and done effectively. Because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to lose the conflict between shipping new features and making sure that they're more secure. That is typically the outcome that goes, right? Because at the end of the day, the company needs to make money, and then if we don't ship anything, the company is not going to make money, right? So if they have an ability to balance that out, most likely the balance is going to be like, okay, well, we'll cut back a little bit on security in order to deliver stuff faster, right? So you need to be able to be ahead of that curve and make sure that all the strategies, all the processes, all the tooling that you roll out doesn't slow down and impact the overall product roadmap specifically. That is probably my biggest advice that I can give to people, is that understand the business process, understand what needs to be delivered when and how, and fit in within that process. Because that way you can be effective. You can manage the risk for the organization, provide value, and you're not slowing anything down.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think Sean and Anatoly has covered a lot. Maybe Ankur, anything that they've missed, you want to add?
I think I think they covered most of it. I think within the organizations that I worked for, we've kind of gone through the idea of using paved paths rather than actually, deploying a solution that actually is only security oriented. How about using something that is also very engineering prone and is useful? A good example could be you might want to understand assets and how they communicate within each other. Instead of deploying something new, why can't you just work with SRE team, deploy distributed tracing as a reality? It is going to help them on their side to understand if something goes down, they need to understand why did it go down from a scalability perspective, and also give us enough information that we could use. So it allows us to have that collaborative effort trying to solve the problem, and it no longer becomes a security issue. It's more of an engineering best practice that you can kind of drive it from that direction. Also, you need to have solution. If you're deploying a security solution, it should be very much prone to a lot of work should be towards a security team. Case in point, as Sean has pointed out, ID scanner. It's great. It solves the problem, but at the same time, a lot of issues go towards the developer or the team because they have to keep deploying new plugins. You're at the mercy of them doing it. Instead, if you take control and on the back end, you deploy something that's more holistic, maybe a container deployment, which uses CLI, that's a better approach than actually making them work. And because if you keep pointing problems or giving them problems, you eventually become the problem. So you want to get out of that situation and give them the right tools to be security first, as well as sort of engineering security first. Let's put it that way.
Wow. No, that's very good thought. Ankur, Anatoly, and Sean, this has been a wonderful conversation. We are sort of towards the end of the time. So now I want to take this last question from Mustafa in the chat in Q&A. Hi, I'm from the AppSec team at Large Bank. We are currently exploring API security solutions focusing on detecting APIs in both north-south and east-west traffic and maintaining a comprehensive inventory of endpoints. Based on your extensive experience, what approaches would you recommend to address these challenges effectively? Are there any critical features or considerations we might overlook that you think are essential? So I think the question is more around how do you maintain a comprehensive inventory of API endpoints? Any thoughts from any of you? Maybe?
I'll chime in on this one. So I think I would maybe rephrase Ankita, the question a little bit different. I think the question was more towards like, how do we select what we need to select, right? And I would go back down if we're like, okay, you need to define your requirements, right? And you need to define the requirements. And in order to define the requirements, you cannot do it as a security team alone. You need to define the requirements comprehensively, right? So you need to go for a security solution to work, you need to go also get the requirements from your architects. You need to get your requirements from your SRE and platform engineering organization, right? You need to get the requirements from the engineering organization, most importantly. Once you have a comprehensive set of requirements, a comprehensive set of stakeholders, then you evaluate the products, okay? And you figure out, okay, which one kind of meets the solutions need that I have, okay? If one of my requirements was in this document is saying, okay, it needs to provide 100% visibility, that I guarantee you is not going to happen, by the way, but you can get as close to you can from that perspective, right? This is going to be one of your requirements, right? And you have developed some sort of custom criteria that is applicable to your own organization. What is important to you from the risk perspective? Is it visibility? Is it protection? Is it more kind of like, or anything in between? Or is it more in the design perspective that it helps you, right? And once you have all those requirements identified, stakeholders identified, then I would recommend that you do a number of like, bake-offs, evaluations, demos, and then the products that you do like, you select them to do the POC. You do the deep dive POC and then understands if the product fits within your requirements, and that's when you learn. But having the diverse group of stakeholders is what allows you to select the best tooling and the best approach in the long run. Because if you say, I, a security team, like this product, we're going to roll it out, it might not necessarily really work well for the other teams at all, right? What is their operational experience, right? If it's going to take you 10 engineers to run and operate this product, that's a no-go from the start, right? So these are the elements that you need to understand as part of the kind of tooling selection comprehensively, right? And then also to piggyback off of Ankur mentioned earlier, is take a look at other products within an organization. Maybe they already have some of the capabilities that you can buy an add-on that fits in well and it covers the use case that you're looking for, right? That might be already an option.
No, 100% Anatoly. And I think what you're saying is basically gather requirements from multiple teams before you even start on the project, right? And then do a deep dive POC with multiple vendors.
Also understand your timelines and also understand what is going to be the budget, both for initial budget, runtime budget, and what it costs operational to run it from each team. These are all the critical elements, because oftentimes what trips people up is like, okay, we have initial budget to buy some solution, but then we need to hire a bunch of engineers to actually run the solution in the long run after the POC and done and everything. And that becomes a real challenge. And what happens at that point is oftentimes you buy a solution and it just sits on the shelf. So what's the benefit of it?
100%. Anyone else, Sean, Ankur, you want to add to this question?
I think Anatoly covered that. I mean, it's definitely all about building out a good requirement set so you know what to go hunting for. And there's going to be obviously the direct cost, the operational cost, the opportunity cost, and that's not something that you figure out in a silo.
Correct. No, awesome. Mustafa, so I think there is, my answer would be also just to tell you on, how to detect both north-south and east-west traffic. That's your very specific question. Your question is, how do you detect both internal and external APIs, essentially? And if to detect APIs, you can either detect it from code itself, because code is a single source of truth, or you can detect it from traffic, API traffic, which is, there are solutions in the market, and Akto does it also, where you can deploy Akto in any environment that your application is running, and you can discover all your APIs that you're talking about from that traffic. Or you can use a solution which can scan your code and discover all the API endpoints and create a Swagger file of all your API endpoints from the code itself. So those are two approaches that we have seen in the market. This should solve your problem statement. And I hope you got the answer, and you can email me if you have any further question on this. But so we are at the end of the webinar. I want to summarize what we discussed. We discussed a lot about the challenges in API security. We discussed how to build your API security program, and everyone had a very interesting take on shift left versus product right, how to work with the developers. And I think Sean mentioned very good summary of how to work with developers. And I think that itself is like very good shift left approach just for the AppSec program itself. So thanks everyone. We have this recorded session. We'll put it on the website, and you can download the recording, see it on YouTube, and write to us if you have any questions. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks Sean. Thanks Ankur. Thanks Ankur for joining the webinar.
Appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye guys.
Bye. Take care.